Hello, this is Best True Crime Documentary, and this story is a bizarre one. It takes place in the Uinta Basin of Utah on a ranch. This is the story of Skinwalker Ranch. UFO reports in the Uinta Basin were publicized during the 1970s. Two claims about the ranch first appeared in 1996 in the Salt Lake City, Utah, Deseret News 3, and later in the alternative weekly Las Vegas Mercury as a series of articles by investigative journalist George Knapp. These early stories detailed the claims of a family that allegedly experienced inexplicable and frightening events after they purchased and occupied the property. Colm Kelleher and co-author George Knapp subsequently authored a book in which they describe the ranch being acquired by the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDSci, to study anecdotal sightings of UFOs, Bigfoot-like creatures, crop circles, glowing orbs, and poltergeist activity reported by its former owners. The ranch, located in West Uinta County bordering the Ute Indian Reservation, was popularly dubbed the UFO Ranch due to its ostensible 50-year history of odd events said to have taken place there. According to Kelleher and Knapp, they saw or investigated evidence of close to 100 incidents that include vanishing and mutilated cattle, sightings of unidentified flying objects or orbs, large animals with piercing red eyes that they say were unscathed when struck by bullets, and invisible objects emitting destructive magnetic fields. Among those involved were retired U.S. Army Colonel John B. Alexander, who characterized the NIDSci effort as an attempt to get hard data using a standard scientific approach. 6 However, the investigators admitted to difficulty obtaining evidence consistent with scientific publication. Cattle mutilations have been part of the folklore of the surrounding area for decades. When NIDSci founder billionaire Robert Bigelow purchased the ranch for $200,000, this was reportedly the result of his having been convinced by the stories of mutilations that included tales of strange lights and unusual impressions made in grass and soil told by the family of former ranch owner Terry Sherman. 7, 8, 9, 10 did Bigelow a Pegasus Award for funding the purchase of the ranch and for supporting John E. Mack's and Bud Hopkins' investigations. Randy called the effort a useless study of a sick supernatural, paranormal, or occult. In the summer of 1994, Terry, a rancher and cattle breeder, and his wife Gwen, employed for 20 years at the local bank, had found their dream ranch. The 480-acre spread was a remote little paradise. It would be a fine place, they thought, to raise their teenage son and 9-year-old daughter. They were puzzled why such a prime piece had been sitting vacant for 7 years. The land bordered the Uinta and Ute Indian Reservation and was protected by a long red rock ridge. The first signs that something was different about the place were the large, circular impressions which the shermans kept finding in their pastures. One configuration formed a 30-foot triangle. Other circles were found measuring roughly 3 feet wide and 1 to 2 feet deep. The soil inside the holes was firmly impacted. About this time, Terry began having trouble with his prize breeding herd of cattle. Cows were dying under unexplained circumstances. In April of 1995, the weirdness dramatically escalated. While checking his cattle one evening, Terry saw a silent glowing object pass over a 50-foot tall stand of poplar trees that fringed one of their fields. A few days later, Gwen saw another unexplained flying object. It looked like headlights, but they were a little ways away from the craft. It just lit the whole side of the mountain up like it was broad daylight. Terry started examining his odd cattle deaths more closely. The first cow found dead, shortly after a UFO sighting, showed only a hole in the center of its left eyeball. Predators had not touched the carcass, and Sherman noted a chemical smell in the vicinity. A short time later, a second cow was found dead with the same hole in the left eyeball. With both these animals, Terry had taken a wire and inserted it into the hole to gauge its depth. In both cases, the wire slipped in easily to the center of the brain. Also during this time, some of the Sherman's cows started disappearing. As Terry said, "We contacted everyone around. We looked everywhere. They just vanished." In one instance, Terry followed the tracks of a cow in fresh snow. The tracks just stopped under some trees at the edge of a field. The area around the animal's last steps was a large amount of freshly fallen branches that Mr. Sherman could tell had just came off the trees above him, as if something had shot straight up through them. During the next few months, the Shermans observed a variety of craft and the mutilation activity continued. The most spectacular aerial phenomenon the Shermans would see: these 100-foot circular openings appear in the air. It was like 4 orange-colored doorways would sort of spiral open. Looking through a high-powered scope, they would watch small craft emerge from the hovering portals, fly around the property, then go back into the portals and disappear. In a rare occurrence, the Sherman's son found a mutilated cow within 5 minutes of its death. The young man had seen the gentle Angus eating peacefully and returned moments later to find it dead. The cow's rectum had been cored out with a 6-inch wide hole that was 8 inches deep. High-impact anal probing should not be done by amateurs. During that summer, Terry, his son, and his nephew had heard unintelligible voices while standing in a nearby pasture. The sound, which they first assumed to be the echoes of a CB radio, seemed to emanate out of the air directly above them. As they listened more closely, they could distinctly hear 2 voices speaking in an unknown language, which Terry described as choppy anti-halting, like a cross between Russian and Native American. One voice had a deep resonant tone and the other was higher pitched. Terry yelled into the air, "We can hear you." The voices stopped momentarily and the deeper voice broke into a low rumbling laugh. The conversation then went on as before. By the fall, events seemed to be moving toward a climax. Seeing the lights in a field one night, Gwen grabbed her binoculars. Focusing in, she was shocked to see a square-lighted structure sitting on the ground. Before the light blinked out, Gwen caught a glimpse of a large, heavy-set individual seated in the object. A short time later, the craft appeared again. This time both she and Terry watched through a 60-power spotting scope. They could see a figure standing next to the object. Terry described the person. This time both she and Terry watched through a 60-power spotting scope. They could see a figure standing next to the object. Terry described the person as being over 7 feet tall and decked out in a totally black uniform and very huge. The Shermans noted that the being appeared to have a visor or something shiny on its face, because of the way the light glinted from its head area. Another eerie phenomena soon began to plague the Shermans. The family started noticing glowing blue balls moving around the property. The balls gave off a crackling sound, seemed intelligently controlled and could either hover or move unbelievably fast. One evening, the Shermans watched as a blue ball approached one of their horses. The light hovered within a foot of the horse's face, spooking it mightily. From a distance of 10 feet, Gwen shined a flashlight on the blue globe and it retreated. It then approached Terry as if inspecting him. Terry described it as a glass ball about the size of a baseball, which appeared to contain 2 blue fluids which intermingle with each other. The Shermans said it was the scariest thing they had ever seen in their lives. Later that evening, the dreaded blue ball returned. This time it hovered in the face of a cow. Again the globe retreated and the Shermans' 3 dogs, after some coaxing, took off after the blue balls, chasing them into the woods, too far away for the Shermans to see where they had went. Then they heard a loud yelp. The dogs did not return that night. The Shermans decided to go look for their lost dogs in the morning. The next day, Gwen and Terry found 3 burned circles in the woods. In the center of each circle, they discovered a greasy blob of what looked to be shortening or butter. The trees above the burned rings also had a scorched appearance. According to Terry, the grass eventually grew back, but the tree limb died. The killing of their dogs was the last straw for the Shermans and they decided to leave the ranch and sell the property. The ranch's previous owners, who had no children, had lived there since the 193 OS. Mr. Meyer had died 15 years previously and Mrs. Meyer lived there by herself for 7 more years before she died. When the Shermans moved in, they had noticed heavy dog chains bolted by each of the 4 exterior doors. The Shermans assumed the couple had a dog which they moved from chain to keep it out of the sun. Terry asked a farmhand about this and he said no. He was told the Meyers had 4 huge ferocious dogs, which they kept chained by each of the doors. In a scenario straight out of a Stephen King novel, the Shermans noticed another peculiar feature of the old place. The inside of every door in the house was outfitted with a heavy deadbolt. At the center of the house was a hallway area with its access doors bolted. In the hallway was a closet with a deadbolt on the inside, as if so a person could bolt themselves inside of the closet to hide. After their decision to sell out, Terry had fallen into a conversation with a group of Ute Indians who worked at the local water department. The Indians told Terry that they had formed a pool to take bets on how long the Shermans would last on the ranch. The longest guess was 1.5 years. The Shermans lasted 2 years. Indians and their gambling laugh out loud. A local Indian shaman friend of Terry's told him that there were tribal songs about the spirits and spooks of the ranch area, going back 10 generations. The shaman said the area was considered unholy ground and was on the path of the Skinwalkers. Among the stream of curiosity seekers to the ranch in the Shermans' final days was a man who identified himself as a naval intelligence officer from North Carolina. The polite Navy man sympathized with their situation and had a great interest in reviewing their photos and videos. Another man, who wasn't so polite, lurked around the property in a white four-wheel drive vehicle. Terry noticed that it had different plates every time he saw it. After an angry confrontation, Terry took the man's photo. Doing a little detective work of his own, he determined that the man was an agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. From my research, this could not be confirmed, but at this time the Air Force was doing research on high-impact rectal probing and had a lot of questions. The Shermans spent their last day on ranch rounding up cattle. By late evening they were bone-tired. They locked all the doors and saw their children to bed. Gwen and Terry took hot showers and then fell into a deep sleep. The next morning they awoke to find their bedding covered with blood. They both had a 1-inch scoop mark on their thumbs that managed to cover their beds in blood. Selling the ranch had posed a dilemma for the Shermans. "We didn't want to put anyone at risk," Terry said. At the suggestion of several different researchers, the Shermans were put in touch with Las Vegas millionaire Robert Bigelow, who in recent years had invested substantial amounts of money in UFO research. In September 1996 the deal was finalized. Bigelow bought the ranch for less than the Shermans paid for it. Terry also sold Bigelow a select herd of cattle and was hired on as an overseer for the operation. As part of the deal, the Shermans signed a non-disclosure agreement which barred them from discussing anything that happened on the property from that point on. This included the research that was done for almost a decade there. This is the first part of a two-part story. In the next episode we will talk about some of the things that happened after NIDS had set up their cameras and began observing the property. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I know I am looking forward to the second part. Thank you for listening, and as always, take care, like, comment and subscribe. Good night.